then I hit the blue button, and lo and behold, there we go. Apparently we're now live. There we are, and I need to update it so it's showing the chat from the new box and not the previous one. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Fake Accents Unite. I am assured by the YouTube gods that this is actually working this time. Finally, there we are. Good grief. Let me
as I shill it out for a second time.
There we go. Okay. Marvellous. YouTube having a bit of a cock up there, where the auto start apparently just wasn't working. Just wasn't working at all. We have a stream, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Let's do introductions again. Joined as always by my, I nearly said insufferable there, but my long-suffering co-host, the Britcher. Good evening, sir. Welcome to the stream.
Good evening, I love you too.
Yes, indeed. And we're also joined by, this week, from across the pond, by Staff Sergeant Sniper. Good evening.
You almost broke me with that one. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for having me on, guys.
It's an absolute pleasure. For those of you who aren't aware of who Staff Sergeant Sniper is, he works away in the US, doing similar stuff to Don. He's just taken on the Don the Pleb, that is, and he does streams at the moment. You said 4 times a week.
Yes. So I have the Sunday show, which you've been on, Sunday Morning Coffee. I have Mechanical ASMR on Friday nights at 10:30, or no, excuse me, at 10 o'clock Eastern time. And then on Monday and Wednesday, I have a stream at 10:30 Eastern because I can't get my times straight. Monday is community stream, and Wednesday is the Everyone is a Fed show, which is a thing that I think is going to come up in this stream.
Marvelous. So, yes, if you're interested,
I have to ask because I mean, given that we were just talking about NSO's OnlyFans account, prior to coming on air, there was something about mechanical ASMR.
Yes. So, okay.
Care to explain?
So the last time I did this on a stream, Count Dankula on a Mark stream, Count Dankula said I was about to commit suicide. So mechanical ASMR would be this. Because if you say, "Hey, we're going to cock guns and drink whiskey," YouTube kind of doesn't let you stream.
So mechanical ASMR is essentially you playing with your weapons.
Well, we rack guns, drink whiskey, and just kind of talk crap, and then delete it at the end, so that we don't get caught.
I see. Okay.
Yes, yeah. I think some people in the audience will more than likely know why I was laughing there. But please, by all means, continue.
Continue. In the spirit of the FedPosty nature, it does kind of bring us nicely into our first story of the evening, which is what was it? Justice for J6 rally that's been going on in the US. I say going on. Apparently, about 200 people turned up, and there have been some rather suspicious-looking photos going around of so-called feds who were running it because no one else turned up, and an enormous number of riot police who appear to outnumber everybody. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that, Sniper, if you're familiar?
Well, it's the Justice for J6 rally this is not actually the first one, and I didn't find this out until I started looking into it. And of course, everybody screamed, "Fed up, fed up, fed up." It does seem to be that Pelosi and company have definitely used it to make a show. They put the fences back up around the Capitol building, the Supreme Court themselves. They didn't go all the way down the mall this time, obviously. They had hundreds of riot cops scattered everywhere. Supposedly, the National Guard was on standby. And like 100 honest-to-God people showed up, and a couple of congressional candidates, namely the more notable one being the primary challenger for, I believe it's Washington State 3, Joe Kent, and a couple others, what have you, and did speeches. But mixed in the crowd, as you are not wrong, seems to have been an awful lot of undercover cops, undercover agents of different varieties, including one who was dressed up like Antifa. I mean, more or less, in solid black and wearing a mask. Hang on a second.
I have been enjoying a lot of the edits on Twitter of various characters from that march, kind of covered in glowing, sort of glowing in the dark sort of edits. Let me see if I find. And then, of course, there was a thread earlier which was on 4chan of people who are quite clearly not from 4chan posting about how this person is not a Fed, this person is, a patriotic American in this way. And of course it became entirely memeable, and half of the biographies for these people were then clearly made up by shitposters who were just trying to have a laugh with it, I thought it was kind of ridiculous. But, I mean, the state of America at the moment, I mean, it's kind of gone down sort of more low-key, I suppose, disguised power levels, if you will. I mean, it's not something that we really see discussed. Even
Well,
yeah.
Well, ever since January 6th, it's been quite simple. Anytime anybody goes to do anything, everybody immediately points at them and screams, "Law, you're a Fed." And so everybody just keeps their head down and does absolutely nothing and no activism to speak of. Outside of a handful of examples at state level, nobody wants to do anything that might make it onto the national stage because they're scared to death. To the point that I literally created a show and named it the Everyone is a Fed Show, to get the point of, at this point, if we want to get anything done, I don't care if it's a Fed psyop or not, show up and do things, or lay down and die. What other choice do you have?
I'm just gonna bring up the image for people who haven't been aware of what's going on here. A bit of a meme for us. If we save this, yeah, like this is the problem that I find with it, is it is also a case of something where it's going to prevent people doing anything, because why would you do anything if you're just going to get, one, accused of being a Fed, and secondly, there are clearly people there dressed in their jorts, looking.
Yes, the memes of the five guys who, if they weren't Feds, they are. Is it 5 or 6 guys? If they weren't Feds, they were. They were doing very good approximations of being one. They're all crew cutted. At the very least, they're vets, but they very much look like Feds. 2 of them have got bulging pockets, looking like they've got a concealed carry piece. Oh, you've got it up there. There you go.
Yeah.
If you zoom in on the pockets, which is not something we're probably going to want to do, but if you zoom in on the pockets, there's at least 2 concealed carry weapons in there. There's every indication that whole group is probably Feds. You remember the meme where there's like 8 Spider-Mans all pointing at each other?
Yes.
In a circle? Yeah, they took those shorts and put them on the Spider-Man, all pointing at each other. I saw that last night.
I look at it. They're all wearing the same watch, which I found quite amusing. The
same sunglasses, or same-ish sunglasses. Technically, there's a couple of different types.
But yeah, have you been following this at all, Britisher? The goings on across the pond.
I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about right now.
Fair.
So I am very much out of this.
Well, let's talk more in generalities at the moment. So, obviously, Biden and his entire administration have seriously cracked down on any form of protest. Trump and any kind of hint of the previous administration has been obliterated from current memory. They refuse to refer to him by name. It's always the previous administration, unless they're blaming him directly for something. And then you've also got this issue of they're trying to mandate a whole series of things, particularly related to COVID, that are then questionable. And as much as people are calling out hypocrisy on Twitter or whatever, especially like MSNBC complaining about how Trump was going to mandate vaccines, and now of course they're literally getting down on their knees to lick the boots of Joe Biden's administration when they're doing the same thing. But
unironically on this, I actually have 3 little images. Let me drop them in the stream chat for you.
Sure.
So the first one is if it loads. There we go. That's the Texas lawsuit. Everybody remembers the Texas lawsuit, right? Where Texas tried to sue over all the rule changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the second one is going to be a math rule map, and all the ones in gray are the ones that have no mask mandates. And then the third one is the list of states who have either through law or through their attorney generals said we're not doing this vaccine mandate thing. Seems to be a little pattern, doesn't it?
So the first image is, just go through those again because I've just been getting them up for you.
Oh, F's in stream. All right. So the first image is the famous Texas lawsuit image, right? Where Texas sued Pennsylvania, and 19 other states joined in over the rules changes during the election. The second one would be the mask restrictions map. So the ones in gray have no mask mandates. The ones in orange have mask mandates. And then that bottom one, the last one, is the list of states who either passed a law saying that you cannot have vaccine mandates, in the case of Florida, Missouri, Montana, and Texas, I believe it is, or their AGs have said, we're suing because we're not doing this.
Right.
Patterns are pretty stark there, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, does this fall primarily along voter lines anyway, or is it something else?
There's some correlation, but I mean, doesn't it kind of look like battle lines are getting drawn?
I mean, there's
just a little bit.
I mean, I don't want to throw around anything too dramatic, but because I know that people, everybody likes to scream secession, etc. And if any state was to secede, I think it would be Texas, followed by others. But
New Hampshire released a bill to float secession in their state legislature on Friday. New Hampshire. Don't ask me.
No.
I wouldn't have thought it would have been New Hampshire.
All it takes is one, and then the United States of America is not quite so united. But then you've got the deflection from the internal stresses, which we'd noticed, because the US, the UK, and Australia have just come together to form this new defense pact, haven't they? Over China, presumably, because the Chinese have been saying that they potentially want to move on Taiwan, and as they have done for ages, and so especially with the pushback which China has been putting the pressure on in terms of Australian imports and that sort of thing, they need a little bit of a bolster of defence there. But does it mean anything if we can't even defend ourselves from the internal strife? They're just going to sit there and wait until we're in a position where we're weak enough, exploit it, and it'll just be a death by 1,000 cuts, which, being a torture technique that they invented, is something quite useful. I don't know if you covered this in the week that was, Britisher.
Oh, the sort of US, UK, Australia pact. Yes, I covered that.
Indeed.
Didn't they hose the frogs
Yes.
over that?
The French are very, very annoyed. I've heard some statements made by I think it was the French foreign minister, the likes of which you just can't imagine. I mean, these are people who talk in diplomatic terminology normally, and they're talking of duplicity and outright lying and misleading, and you listen to it and you go, whoa, they're annoyed. The French are really annoyed.
Well, would you... Are we not allowed to be annoyed after, what has it been, nearly 25 years, and they haven't delivered that aircraft carrier they were building for us?
Well, you have to look at it from the perspective that France is a global power, like the UK. So we're not a superpower like the US, but we are a big power. We are one of the few countries that can basically project power.
Mm-hmm.
And France is one of those countries. And now if you look at this situation where effectively Western powers get together in order to stand up to China, and France isn't even consulted, that's what has kind of really annoyed the French. The fact that there are 12 submarines, I mean, I've no idea to what extent the construction had already advanced, but I would assume, given that the contract was signed some 4 years ago or whatever, some of these submarines must be underway being built. Now the Australians aren't taking them. So that is the contract, but aside from the contract, it's more the geopolitical side of things that the French are really annoyed about, because they are now... Put it like this, when Brexit happened, the French kind of saw it as, okay, everyone in the EU rally round, we'll isolate the British, we'll make them look stupid, and now look what's happened. The Brits were supposed to be the isolated country, the sort of Billy No-Mates in the middle of the Atlantic, and what has happened is that the French have ended up as the nuclear power that nobody even asks.
Well, of course.
And
I will say...
Yeah, they're not happy about it at all.
I will say I find it a little confusing overall in that Biden seems to have zero relationship with you guys. And by that I mean like less than zero relationship. Like will not take calls from your government. And all of a sudden, he enters into a deal with the UK and Australia over some, I assume, some old 688s. It doesn't compute unless it's a money grab. It really doesn't.
Way would it be a money grab? I mean, strictly speaking, it's a technology transfer. But basically, the US and the Brits are basically allowing the Australians to have their technology.
Well, people forget that the US has a very, very successful relationship. And I don't mean successful like I mean, it's financially successful. That's what I'm kind of getting at. With the Brits, particularly over things like Trident. Like we rent from the Americans a lot of our nuclear technology, and a lot of our sort of military tech as well is usually the offcuts of what the Americans can't make work. So, for instance, the F-35B, which is the new replacement for the Harrier. God knows why we ever got rid of the Harrier. But, it's capable of STOL, but not VTOL. Short takeoff and landing, but not vertical takeoff and landing. And the reason that it was sold to the British was because the Americans couldn't make it work after 9 years of fiddling with it. So it's an over-engineered aircraft, and they've sold it to us over the market value, and we're kind of now saddled with this. So that in terms of the military-industrial complex, that's been very successful. And Australia is currently in a bind at the moment. I mean, it's currently exercising extremely totalitarian protocols on its citizens. It's being pressured economically by China, and its growth at the moment is a little bit in question. It's not stalled yet, as far as I'm aware, but seems to be a little bit in question. And so it seems to me that it's likely the Australians have reached out and the British have responded and the Americans have got in on it. And it's not going to have been something which has come down direct from Biden. Although it's possible that whilst the Democrats are, in many ways, kind of evil people, they do recognise that there is a greater evil in the Chinese takeover of a major. I mean, I know Australia is the southeast, but it's a westernized power in the cultural sense, and so much as I would say that Taiwan is, that's the country that the country people don't think about. That would be a linchpin in any kind of great global conquest that China is beginning to do. They would start there. So it seems important to bolster the defences in that area, if only to prevent another grab similar to what we saw with Crimea. I mean, feel free to rebut me on this, Britisher, if you think I'm talking nonsense.
It makes more sense. It makes more sense if you're trying to defend Taiwan than Australia itself, because Australia, outside of being a test bed for Western markets, they don't have that much. But defend Taiwan does make sense in that there are two chip manufacturers effectively left on the planet. One's the mainland, the other's the island.
Right.
So if the island is conquered, there's one chip manufacturer left on the planet. And I mean, we've already got like 5 or 6 plants over here in the United States that have parking lots full of cars constructed with not a single computer in them, waiting for computers. And we're already in that boat now, and waiting until Taiwan is owned by the Chinese and see how bad that gets.
Any comment, Britisher?
Well, I would say as such, this is, I think, strategic thinking that is more than likely beyond any particular administration. I mean, I remember seeing one of those documentaries by the BBC where they kind of interviewed a lot of sort of insiders in Washington. I think this was at the time when Trump was in power.
Mm-hmm.
And basically they were kind of interviewing all sorts of folks sort of in the political scene in Washington, and it seemed quite clear that whether they were Democrat or whether they were Republican, they were tilting away from the Chinese. One of the things in particular that seemed very clear was that the economical push in previous years had been, get out of our way, we want to be involved in China. Whereas now, companies were effectively looking to the US government saying, we need protection from the Chinese. They're stealing all our intellectual property. So there seemed to be a sort of tilt against China some time ago. This was already going on with the Trump administration, but it seemed to be as if sort of in Washington itself, sort of the apparatchiks themselves had decided we will be moving against China. So I think this is pretty much just a continuation of what we saw. So I could well imagine there will have just been strategic decisions taken when Biden came to power, which would have been taken had it been Trump. And which, okay, what is our strategy for the next 4 years? And I could well imagine this will have been part of it.
So you're saying this is more coming out of the permanent government, and whoever's at the top matters very little on the momentum of this thing.
I mean, I think the guy at the top will eventually be the guy that has to sign off on it, if you know what I mean. But yes, I think this is pretty much the sort of the entire political apparatus was beginning to look at China and go, this isn't working anymore.
Well, I mean, they did change their orders to Raytheon and what have you. It was documented a while back. They stopped buying They stopped buying air-to-mud assets and started buying air-to-air assets and things that you might need for a Pacific War more than a desert war. So you may not be wrong. It may just be the wheels of the permanent government in a way we don't.
Well, I mean, I think it's just simply a matter of, seeing what is happening. One is seeing a new kind of potential superpower arise. And therefore one is positioning oneself in advance of this, in expectation of it, effectively. So I think, back in the Trump days, there was also the situation about Huawei, wasn't there? NSO, when they were pressurizing the Brits, saying, look, we don't want you to install this, Huawei hardware in the sort of next generation technology communication system in Britain.
The 5G towers, yes.
And, so I think one can see there that this was already kind of ongoing. I mean, I've been arguing all along, I just want an all-out Cold War with China. I mean, I'm one of the kids that grew up in the Cold War with the Soviets, and I would be quite happy to see exactly the same things done to China. I just do not understand why we're trading with them in order to help enrich them when they are in fact clearly the enemy. Absolutely ludicrous.
The argument will be made. I mean, as much as we may not want to face it, is the fact that the progressivism, as it were, has kind of infected the minds of everyone involved in making the policy. So the concept of essentially sidelining an entire civilization based on the idea that they are that civilization. Think of all those poor Chinese businessmen who will go out of business if we do this. We're not at war with them. We don't have the same.
Instead, think of the poor Vietnamese businessmen and Indian businessmen.
Oh yes, you couldn't get away with that.
Businessmen and Indonesian businessmen who instead will thrive. I mean, it's hardly as if corporate America and corporate Europe is suddenly going to decide, let's build everything at home again.
No,
so chances are they're still going to want to build these things in sweatshops. But why do they need to be situated in China?
Oh, they will, but they won't be. They won't be making that argument because they don't think in that way. They're thinking in terms of essentially, and the COVID pandemic hasn't helped either because, of course, it may stop Asian hate and all of this sort of namby-pamby ridiculous.
Yes.
Ridiculous propaganda essentially has hyper-sensitized politicians to doing anything. And then, of course, the Trump administration was very, very anti-China, and they can't be seen to parrot that rhetoric with the way that they're doing things. And I mean, it's being fully exploited by China, as it would be. And
I'm not sure whether there isn't some kind of doctrine that I either don't know about or don't understand that is somehow being followed. Because, just in the same way as, for example, the French have a doctrine of embracing the Germans. Because after several disastrous wars against Germany, they've decided that they can never be enemies with them again. And this embracing of the Germans as a kind of political doctrine of France is now taking on ever more ludicrous proportions, whereby by now they're thinking of, a European army. And you think, well, so you are the nuclear power with the aircraft carrier, but it's the Germans who eventually will be in charge. Are you sure you really want to continue with this embracing malarkey? And therefore I think once countries get into this kind of doctrinal thinking of this is the doctrine and we follow it, very often the people who are actually following these doctrines lose sight of the bigger picture and just blindly continue on with the doctrine. And I'm just wondering whether there is some bizarre doctrine afoot that was embraced by, American government circles and is still being pursued, even though by now it makes no sense whatsoever.
Well, you have to remember that, like, the Cold War with Russia was able to come around as well because we had this, there was a history of Russian aggression. Chinese aggression into Western territory is not really a thing historically. It's certainly not a thing in living memory. And
well, Mark, they have threatened the Vietnamese a few times. They've threatened India a few times. They threaten Taiwan every once in a while. And the new thing seems to be threatening Japan.
Who cares?
And while Japan, Japan may not be the West, but they are at least somewhat westernized.
Somewhat westernized, but like our only real relationship. I mean, I'm thinking about it from the perspective of Europe, right? Like, we don't really care. Japan is that place which produces cartoons far away.
I'm
sushi.
not sure that we don't care at all. I think folks are worried about the rise of this sort of
they're getting there.
Chinese giant.
They're getting there, but the average person on the street doesn't really think about it. And the concept of buying local has been completely obliterated anyway. But then people don't check where their products really come from. They just go, right, that's that, and they buy something and it's cheap and it's nasty, and they go, oh yeah, because that's Chinese, okay, well, I'll buy something else then. But nobody, certainly nobody I know thinks that, apart from perhaps yourself, really gives this any kind of thought. The people who really do, who are on the ground, kind of regular people, are the people who are having their homes bought from under them by the Chinese. Now, those are the people who suddenly realise, I can't buy anywhere. Even if I want to move, my options are sell to the Chinese and go somewhere completely different, or rent from the Chinese, especially in the northern towns in Britain, for instance. So
that's happening here too. Just not talked about in the same way that you guys seem to have noticed it.
Well, isn't there a town in Canada that is really, really heavily invested in by Chinese?
Well, you would be talking about Vancouver, British Columbia, just in general. It was called...
a Chinese investor has bought a Canadian ghost town for $1 million. But that's about it. And they're buying up most of Montreal.
Well, they don't... they're worried about government grabbing their money. And I think they're also not really sure about the Chinese economy.
Yes, there's a history of the semi-autonomous companies getting uber wealthy and then turning around and buying physical assets everywhere else because quite frankly, if you do too good for too long, see the media conglomerate that the Chinese are literally destroying at the moment, because one person that worked for them went to a Japanese war monument from World War II. If your assets are physically out of China, then there's some chance that you can flee and survive.
Well, you say that, but China has a nasty habit as well, and this is also one of the fears of they can confiscate your property, and it doesn't matter where you own it in the world. If you're a Chinese citizen, then they consider you to be owned by them, and therefore if they need to, they can own things, including taking the deeds to property that you own in other countries, and it will then be de facto owned by the state. So there is a concern that there is a concerted effort by people who are buying property in other countries that it may end up not being owned by private individuals, but by or as private individuals you can get in China, but by the Chinese, by the CCP itself.
Because I think in China itself, haven't they got a time limit on actual property, on owning land or houses or flats?
Not entirely.
You can only own them for a certain amount of time, can't you?
Let me have a look. Actually,
I believe that's correct. I do know they have a history of seizing back companies from people.
Let me
And
see.
meanwhile, sorry?
In China, there is no unified property rights.
Mm-hmm.
You must ownership rights are protected. You're allowed to. It can neither harm public interests nor the legitimate rights and interests of others. So you can own exclusive parts within an apartment building, for instance. So you can have individual ownership of apartments, but rural collectives have to own everything else, basically.
Yeah, and the zone is a very small geographical zone. That's correct.
You can't own land.
But I'm not sure whether they can own it in perpetuity. That's the thing.
No, well, you can't.
Almost like a leasehold.
Yes, it's a leasehold. You can't own land. The owner of a right to build is able to build buildings and accessory facilities, and then they are able to possess, utilize, and obtain profits from the land. This is limited, and ownerships of the buildings will change together with the land. So it's supposed to be automatically renewed upon expiration. And if the government takes it back, it's supposed to be compensated. But in reality, whether this happens or not is kind of questionable.
Yeah, I would definitely say questionable.
Thrilling stuff, ladies and gentlemen.
But before we move away from this part of the world, though, I do want to shout out to the Australians. As much as over here everybody seems to be laying down and being scared and won't do anything. Although they did actually have a mass mandate protest in New York City that got zero media coverage and was surprisingly large. Most of the rest of the time here we're laying down. In Australia, they're rising up hard. And to be honest with you, they're gonna have to, because they've reinstituted the police state over there.
I mean, what is it the Australians are fond of saying? Remember that we're not just descended from criminals, but also their jailers.
Jailers, yeah. So, and you're seeing that play out in real time. And there was some footage of them just basically saying to hell with it. There's 10,000 of us and 50 of you. We're going through that line, and if you don't like it, we don't really care. And the reality is that is how that works. So Australia's made it very clear they're not going to stop until the people make them stop. And it's good to see that there's some chance they might try.
It's really...
Also the French. Surprisingly.
I'm just having a look, because there's mostly things about Australia being, it's for travellers, right? So, there are these entry restrictions, etc. And there's a lot of stuff on the BBC about expats, because entry to Australia is currently closed, essentially. And
I want to say it might be New South Wales, whichever one has got Melbourne in it, because I can't remember. But like Melbourne keeps getting locked all the way back down. Sydney keeps getting locked all the way back down. It's not the whole country, but it is. Their country has gone from having a healthy rural population, to where it was like 70-30, 70 in the cities, 30 rural, to like almost 95% or something like that in the cities at this point. So all they have to do is lock the cities down.
Well, the government,
and that's what they've been doing.
The government in Australia wants to vaccinate 80% of its population over 16 immediately, before it even considers exiting lockdown. They appear to be adopting the New Zealand approach, the kind of it's got to be zero COVID or nothing else, because they've only had 1,000 deaths, I think, just over 1,000. And they're going like we've I mean, I don't know how much they're testing everyone, but that's nothing. I mean, really, it's nothing. And the fact is that they're having so many more issues. I mean, we're having so many more issues because our health service is currently clogged, for instance, and they're just refusing to. They haven't addressed the issues which underlay that, which is they're understaffed and they've got not enough beds. I mean, general beds, let alone any other, the intensive care beds. Given that most people do this, and then there's the kind of misinformation side as well, because this is not just being enforced. I mean, Australia is an extreme example because they're enforcing it with the full weight of the law. But like, there was a poll the other day asking people what they thought the hospitalization rate was for COVID in America, and it was like 40%, 42% of Democrats or something thought that if you got COVID, there was a 50-50 chance of you being hospitalized. And there was a 30% of Republicans thought this, and when obviously the real figure is around 2.5%, right? And those are just people who go in to hospital, not who need to be put on emergency intubation, etc.
I mean, it's literally a year and a half or close enough of straight up media, mainstream media disinformation hysteria on purpose. I'll avoid some of the triggering words, but a couple weeks back, everybody was talking about quote unquote horse paste, right? And here in the U.S., literally, NPR, AP, some of the big papers would post, here in this state, calls to poison control are up, 97%. This is Mississippi, over quote unquote horse paste, right? Well, that 97% was in the context of there were 2 calls the year before. There were 8 calls this year.
Yeah, I think I remember.
And they did this over and over and over again in state after state after state. They had some doctor come up and say that a gunshot victim couldn't get into the ER because of the hospital. The hospital was full of people who ate quote unquote horse paste. And then the hospital releases a letter that says, "Dude, you ain't even worked for us in 2 months. Shut up."
Yeah, I remember that. Goodness me. I mean,
so
what do you make of the hysteria at the moment, British? I feel like everyone's kind of ticking along. They've kind of accepted that this is the state that we're currently in, but it just seems to be like a really slow death of a nation.
I mean, I think that I'm somewhat on the other side of the fence on this one.
Well, that's why I'm asking you.
I think those figures that you quoted, I think I heard Bill Maher pretty much sort of make the same point. Saw it somewhere on Twitter. There was a clip in which he was saying, yes, that the overestimation of how dangerous this thing was now had, that it's almost as if one has become too successful in one's sort of government messages. To the point where people now sort of think, oh, you get this, and you'll 50% chance, or I think 40% chance, or something like that, of ending up in hospital. But as such, yes, I am not someone who sort of completely disagrees with the idea that something needs to be done in terms of vaccination.
Sure.
I very much am.
But something has been done in terms of vaccination. As we know, over 80% of the quote-unquote vulnerable have been done it, and it's now available nationwide for free that you could book it and get it next week.
Here in Britain, aren't we pretty much approaching something like, or have even passed, sort of 80% of over 16-year-olds having their first jab or something like that?
Vaccine.
I think it is very, very high rates by now in Britain.
And every time you approach a rate, they change the number, which is what they've been doing over here.
Statistics.
And it's we're going to come out with these mandates, and literally They will not put this in my child. This is the hill I have decided this far, no farther. They will not put this in my child. They will not put this in me. My wife has decided they will not put this in her. And so be it. And there's an awful lot of this country getting there. Something like 35, 40%.
Well, I mean, according to the maps you showed us, it pretty much falls along sort of the polarized lines of the nation. It's the left that is vaccinating, and it's the right that is refusing to vaccinate.
It's not even. It's not even the right.
That's not even that. It's they're making it. They're not making it a law that you have to. So I'm in Utah, right? Utah does not have a law about mandating what have you. However, there's something like 40% of Utah that took the shot. Where the line in the sand is, you can't make me.
The total number of vaccinations in the UK from December to date is 77 million. And of those, 40 million are the first dose. So 40 million versus 37 million. It's roughly 2/3 of our population have been vaccinated. So if you have faith in the vaccine and you're not concerned about the any potential side effects, or you consider yourself to be vulnerable enough to take the risk, as it were, then lo and behold, that's it. You've done it. But the thing I struggle with, Britisher, with this is all of the, aside from Sniper's point on mandating it, and people asserting that it is in any way comparable to, say, like when I went to Kenya and they mandated that I had to have a yellow fever vaccine. Given that the reported deaths from and complications from this vaccine are far in excess. I think there have been more complications with this particular vaccine than have been with any other vaccine in the past 16 years, since like 1986 or something like that. So it's clear that this is a little bit different. And then you have all these other studies which are coming out and conflicting as well, which are saying natural immunity is better. Then you've got people saying natural immunity plus the vaccine is better. And not to mention the relative risks. So, for instance, there's the whole Nicki Minaj thing that's been going on, right? The nonsense with that. But in this country, for instance, there have been 9 cases of, infertility, I think, have been reported, for instance. This is very low. I mean, as we've mentioned, there have been a huge number of vaccine doses in this country with no issues. So what ends up happening is you have this very, very low chance that something horrible will happen. But the chances of me getting something really horrible when it comes to COVID, including what they're calling long COVID, but is, for all intents and purposes, what we used to call post-viral fatigue syndrome, is still, like, there's a lower chance of that than there is of getting the complication with the vaccine. So why would I take the vaccine? Do you know what I mean?
Especially the enlarged heart thing. But to go to your Kenya example, you said it was a yellow fever shot, right?
Yes.
Okay. How long had it existed?
Yeah, it's a very proven track record. Yes.
Right. And so to me, and I don't know if this is a naughty word in the algorithm, but to me, the anthrax situation broke my trust. And so
anthrax?
The one they use now is pretty good and it's okay, right? But people forget, it's been memory hold, that the first batch of anthrax shot, I don't know a way around that word, was pretty down and dirty, and a lot of people got messed up, and some people didn't survive. And I'm being careful about my words here, but there were a lot of bad juju's on it. Like I said, at first, at this point, it seems to be a lot better, but at first. So my argument on this and why I will not put this thing in me, and I definitely they will not put it in my children. Cold dead body. I'm not even kidding. Is come back to me in 20 years. And, because fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I'm not going through that rough, rushed out stuff again. They did it, they did it when you were a baby. And now they're doing it again, and I'm not going there. And then, of course, you mentioned the other one in 86. Wasn't that a flu vaccine that was contaminated? I believe.
I mean, there've been issues with vaccines in the past, which is one thing. I mean, I don't like the idea that people claim that this one is 150% safe, because we needed it to be.
And so that's my thing. By the way, Britisher, I just looked it up. My state it has said that we will sue against a federal vaccine mandate. My state is 48.6% vaccinated.
So. And Britisher, I don't think we come down on two different sides on this, really. Again, I don't want to see it forced. I want to see it the data to be transparent, and I think I want people to be able to make their own decisions on this, and I think I want people to understand what they're taking and what the risks are to themselves, and vice versa. I have nothing wrong with the government encouraging vaccination or offering it. I have an issue with when they say it doesn't matter. We're not going to consult parents on this. If your kid's in school, we're going to offer them the vaccine, and if the kid wants to take it, they can take it. Like as if the kid has any concept of what they're actually doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Britisher?
Yeah, that's been a thing. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, am I being crazy here, man? Or
my view is simply that I understand that as such two concepts of liberty are crashing into each other here. And
how is my position infringing your liberty? That's what I want to know.
Well, the overall problem, sort of big picture, is that positive liberty and negative liberty are clashing here, and that what the state is trying to provide is positive liberty. What therefore the state is looking for is a high uptake in the vaccine, and what some of the governments are now, coming off the rails over is the fact that they're kind of having their own scientists tell them we're never going to get to any sort of sufficient immunity from the vaccines, given that there is such a strong resistance within the populations.
Well, the vaccine's a leaky vaccine anyway. There's animal reservoirs documented. You're never going to. It's endemic. It's never going away. You may as well just kind of buckle up and get used to that. It's in felines. It's in some bovines. It's not going away.
But my point is, Britisher, we know that people who take. I don't see how we are having a clash of liberty here, of definitions of liberty here. The government is saying, you need to take this vaccine and then we'll give you your freedoms back, because they claim that if we all take the vaccine, that will be the end of it for some reason, even though getting the vaccine doesn't prevent transmission, doesn't prevent contraction, it doesn't prevent you getting symptoms. It just reduces the severity if you were to develop a severe illness on top of it. And then you've got the issue with natural immunity, where if you have a highly vaccinated population with no control group, you can't trace where the mutations are coming from if they're occurring in animal populations, if they're occurring because, the thing I fear is something like MRSA. methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, the kind of super bug. And in a similar way, I worry that these vaccines, if they're not totally effective, which they don't seem to be, especially over time, that they are going to promote the growth of new variants, which are going to prolong the issue in its entirety. I don't see it as the catch-all solution, and anything outside of any kind of argument over what you can and can't force me to do, I just think it's a poor solution. I think that the people who have taken the jab for the short-term benefit of it protecting them because they're vulnerable, people like my parents, who I care about deeply and do not want to see die because they've had some kind of pneumonia infection over this, because if they've taken the vaccine, which they have, so that they can look after themselves. But for instance, like what is the benefit to me to take on a risk to myself that doesn't benefit anyone around me and doesn't benefit the vulnerable population either? That's the thing.
Exactly.
Sorry,
I want to accept the concept that it doesn't benefit anybody.
But
around you.
How does it benefit people around me? That's what I want to know. I mean, as I say,
You don't think it?
I'm open to having my mind changed on this, Britisher, but you've got to help me over the line if you want to do that.
Well, I mean, so basically we say the disease is less severe if you have the vaccine.
Sure.
But you're also less likely to pass it on if you have the vaccine.
That is in question at the moment, because what they don't.
By whom?
By the people who are doing the studies which are testing the effectiveness of the vaccine and telling you that it's effective.
Yeah, there's studies saying it both ways. Is the problem.
I mean, I don't want to. This can't turn into an argument. Because aside from anything else, the data is too new. But we know, for instance, that the effectiveness of the vaccine goes down to about, or certainly Pfizer and AstraZeneca, goes down to about 60% over 6 months. And we know that the vast majority of the population who contract COVID-19 are asymptomatic. And the ones who are asymptomatic, who aren't getting regular PCR tests, etc., what their transmission rates is quite questionable. Whereas the idea that the vaccine reduces transmission is now being called into question, because the primary study that claim was based on was a study of 2 hairdressers who saw 165 clients over a 3-day period. And it just turns out that 2 people is not a great sample size, and 165 people is not a great sample size either.
Well, you see, from what I'm getting, I'm just basically getting sort of like an attack on this subject from every single angle. So it doesn't work. There's no point in it anyway.
No, it works.
Do you know what I mean? So basically, well, no, but what I mean is, in what area do you actually grant it any efficiency?
I grant it efficiency.
And eventually you come to the point where the risk... Eventually you're basically saying that the risk of the vaccine is higher than the possible benefit you could possibly derive from it.
Sure.
Because the disease isn't as dangerous as the vaccine is. So...
Yes.
To me, this does sound rather like, okay, we have got, our think tank has come up with a proposal as to how we're going to diss this thing, and now we're just going to attack it on every single line.
Well,
this is, my view as such has always been, you've got the issue of protection and you've got the issue of individual liberty. The protection being the positive liberty. And as such, what the sides are largely disagreeing on is not actually the liberties, but on whether they agree the disease is severe enough to actually warrant this.
Well, the disease is severe if you're vulnerable to it. But for the vast majority of...
Yes, but as I say, but immediately you put in the caveat, but for the vast majority. So strictly speaking, what you're saying is, in your opinion, the disease is not severe enough to warrant this.
For most
problem is we have another camp that is basically saying, in their opinion, the disease is severe enough to warrant this.
So it's severe enough.
If we dial up the disease, everybody agrees. So basically, if we dial it up to Ebola,
I would not mandate. I would not mandate a smallpox vaccine. I do not believe in positive rights.
We disagree on that.
I mean,
If we just make it available, I would make it free. I believe that was a smart play to make it available and make it free. That's cool. I'm cool with that.
So if there was
I would not mandate it because positive rights are not a thing. That said, in there you had a question that you asked twice, but you didn't let anybody answer. Who would I advocate actually get this thing? Assuming everything's on the up and up with it. Well, let's just say we've established previously that you're a fair chunk older than I am. So probably you. However, Mark is a fair chunk younger than I am. Definitely not him.
I would.
The risk factor number one for this thing is obesity. Risk factor number two is being over 40. Technically, I'm on the bubble.
Yeah, so I would not mandate it, but I would, as we had done at the beginning of this entire endeavour, I would have offered it to everyone who was vulnerable in the medical sense. People who are obese, people who have a long history of smoking, for instance, or who had previously had pneumonia and therefore had scarred lungs, etc., etc. I would also have offered it to, and people with breathing difficulties, etc. There's a huge list of people we already identified, and the NHS, governments, and think tanks identified a group of people who they considered to be this, and that also included everyone over the age of 65. So those people offered the vaccine, given the vaccine, then you work your way ever younger, because as we know, age is also a determining factor. The older you are, and if you've got conditions, you become more vulnerable, and then you just kind of you have to be methodical about that. Then you offer it to everyone going down, and then you say that's it. Then you wait for the data to come in. You also look at it. I mean, because they're now looking at booster jabs and stuff like that, and they're going, that's fine, but again, they're talking about mandating booster jabs. You just go a lot of these people haven't seen their families in years. They just want some assurance that they've taken something which has been effective.
Well, for whom are booster jabs being mandated? Is it kind of like care home workers or something like that?
Well, it seems to be old.
Because I've not heard booster jabs being mandated.
It seems to It seems to be that it keeps coming up that it's going to be mandated in fields revolving around older people. So you're not right. You're not wrong. Like care homes. Hang on, I have daughter aggro.
The jabs will be offered to the over 50s, health and care workers, and younger adults with certain health conditions. But they say offered, but many of the healthcare workers, for instance, are being told that you can't. If you don't take this thing, you don't have a job. This is one of the big things as well.
We're getting a lot of stuff that is effectively indirect enforcement.
And we have.
It's not the state saying you have to have it. It's just basically the state allowing employers who are covering their backs regarding insurance and stuff like that by then saying, well, you have to have it.
And at the same time, every time a company big enough gets caught on this, they wind up having to back down. Because in breaking news, General Dynamics said that they were going to mandate the vaccine, and literally 40% of their workforce said, fine, we'll quit. And they went, okay, fine, we're not going to mandate the vaccine. And this kind of thing keeps happening.
Well, this is the kind of weird thing, and the kind of pushback thing, especially with nurses. Right, so a lot of these are senior healthcare workers, people who know, generally what they're doing, and doctors as well, and who know what they're doing, and they say, "I'm not going to take this." So it's not even an information problem of people not being aware of what the vaccine does. These are highly educated medical professionals who've got a long and storied history in the industry, and they're saying, look, it's just not proven enough. and I'm healthy. I shouldn't be forced to take this, especially if I've already had the disease.
But how big a number of people are we talking about here?
Between 35 and 45%.
Between 35 and 45% of healthcare professionals in the UK are refusing to take it.
Yeah, let me find healthcare professional.
There were entire hospitals that struck that where the nursing staff and some of the doctor staff struck over here. Again, all media blackout because it's off narrative, so we're not going to talk about it. Like I said, did you even know that there was like 15,000 people that stormed through New York over the weekend? No, nobody did.
In a survey of 2,000 NHS workers, participants were asked for. Sorry, I'm just going through this and getting this right. 75% of participants said that they had wished to decline a COVID vaccination, and the others, which is higher, obviously, higher than the percentage of people who actually refused. A lot of them took it anyway.
A fair chunk of them caved in and took it, yes.
And, and this also...
I'm pretty sure, like I said, I'm not even saying that you should not make an informed choice based on who you are and what you're doing. If you're 65, 70 years old to where this thing it becomes much more likely to be deadly, and you decide, hey, I'm already unlikely to live long enough for any side effects to actually mess with me, but the virus stands a better chance of killing me, so the risk reward here is a certain way, then fine, go do it. Go talk to a doctor and go do it. And by that, always caveat, go talk to a doctor and talk through all your risk factors, right? But Mark is a baby, right? And no offense, Mark, but you're a baby from Britisher and Mai's point of view, and it almost guaranteed to survive, and the natural immunity that we're almost not allowed to say is very, very good. And if you don't believe me, follow Thomas Massey on Twitter and just look at all the data he keeps throwing out about it. But don't come down on me and say, government, am going to say that you have to take what is effectively a genetic experiment, because it's too new for them to really know. And after the A thing in the 2000s, I will never trust something young from the government again.
Any final thoughts on this? Because I want us to move on,
Fair enough.
As I say, to me, the maps we saw before shows me how this whole thing a long time ago became political. To the point of two camps have separated, and I'm not really sure to what extent either side is really arguing really from the facts. I'm quite sure either side has their facts at hand, but as such, it's turned into, I'm on the left, I want people to have the vaccine, and I'm on the right, I'm against anything to do with vaccines.
Okay.
And
then go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm just thinking, if I'm the person who's in charge of this, and I've got scientists telling me, look, we need to get to a sufficient figure, in order to be able to somehow manage the situation. That's what I see having happened in France. That the president eventually goes, okay, how do we do this? But yes, I really don't think that this is a power grab on anyone's side, nor that it's a conspiracy of any sorts.
I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's there's.
I think it's far more sort of governments finding themselves in fairly desperate situations.
In this country in particular as well, you have to remember. Well, first off, you've got the SAGE issue, right? Which is obviously the advisory board, which has given the advice for COVID in this situation, and I like, for lack of a better term, these are not scientists who run experiments, but they are civil service in another guise, and they are thinking in terms of national level policy, without it really being proven. You've got Boris Johnson and his government. Boris Johnson's Churchillian, so he wanted a crisis that he could solve as well, and he wanted to appear strong on it.
Well, I think that's a bit unfair. I really don't think he would ever have he would have ever hoped for this, to be honest. I mean, frankly, he even got it himself, didn't he? And ended up on a ventilator or something.
Well, no, they put him in a bed just in case he would need one. Yes,
with if you look what happened in Europe, for example, with the AstraZeneca vaccine. I mean, I don't know what the situation is now, but for a long time they were actually sitting on vaccines that people were refusing to take. They wanted the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine, but they were refusing to take the AstraZeneca vaccine, even though they had them available, because Macron had said something. This was when there was the dispute between the EU and AstraZeneca and Britain, because of who was getting priority with the vaccines, and the EU didn't feel it was getting enough. And then Macron said something along the lines of, it doesn't really work properly anyway, or whatever. And then suddenly, all the way from Spain to Germany, they were sitting on vaccines that they couldn't actually put in people's arms because people were saying, "Oh well, no, I don't, I don't want that one."
Well, this was over the whole mRNA thing, and
in the world of final thought things and changing the subject, because that's what NSO said he wanted to do. Britisher, it is not a political thing. I live in a R+22 state that is 48.6% vaccinated. There are plenty of Republicans who are fine with this. If I were to have my mind swayed on it, the thing I've been watching is the Johnson & Johnson shot. I don't want anything to do with the other three because the other three are very, very experimental. And while the Johnson & Johnson is still a little bit on the experimental side, it's at least close to a regular vaccine. But I lived through the government doing a different version of this, and so I don't trust them. I want the long-term data. That's all it is.
All right, chaps. Well, let's move on, because we're all on good terms, and I don't think it's like we're not trying to convince one another in that sense, but it's good to talk it out sometimes. I think even if it's a little bit frustrating, it's not something we've talked about on the channel for a while. And hopefully not again.
And I apologize for having accidentally opened a can of worms. That's my fault.
It's fine. But yeah, in other news, sort of like more generally. In fact, I will go back to what I was talking about because I can see a few people in the chat who are going, I wish that they would just talk about silly things like Red Dwarf again.
I saw that.
And that sort of thing. So, I mean, we could do a general. Have either of you watched anything or read anything recently which you enjoyed, which you didn't expect to? Because I have. I watched The Iron Giant.
Well, in the failed attempt to launch the show, when the Britisher had to drop because of technical issues and YouTube didn't go live, I had mentioned that, and I didn't tell you why, but I had mentioned that I had drug out my old copy of The Hunt for Red October. It's because, for whatever reason, all of the sudden, the YouTube algorithm just kept throwing Red October videos at me, and I went, I'm going to go get that book out and read it.
Amazing.
I think I last watched the film about a month ago.
Goodness me, Britisher.
There must be something in the water. Yes.
Yeah.
When it comes to something I really enjoyed that I've watched lately, it's All Creatures Great and Small.
This sitcom.
And
I mean,
well,
television
it's not so much a
series, I suppose.
Sitcom, it's a TV series. Because you stipulated something you like that you didn't expect to like.
Okay.
And I started watching this must be a few months back. I started watching this on Amazon with someone, and I suddenly thought, hang on a moment, because I thought, hang on, this is a 1970s classic TV series, and they're remaking it. And you sort of think, oh God, in this day and age, when you hear that something that's a classic that's being remade, you immediately just roll your eyes and go, "Why, God, why?"
Wasn't it set in the 30s anyway?
Yes, I think it's sort of supposed to be 1937 or whatever the first series.
Okay.
And the second series has just begun this week. And I watched this and I thought, well, for once they've actually done a remake. That seems to work. I mean, it really is excellent. There is a bit of wokery here and there on the borders, but by and large, you can pretty much ignore it. It's not sort of in your face, if you know what I mean. By and large, yes, it's a classic series that they've remade, which I sort of thought, oh, good God, this is going to be awful. And then you start watching and go, actually, no. I would give this one pretty much a 10 out of 10. It's very, very good.
Well, there you go. A British recommendation for everyone. As I was saying, I watched the animated classic The Iron Giant the other day, and I as much as I am not one to go out and watch animation very often, but
films in general.
Well, films in general, yes. But I mean, have you seen it, Bridger?
I've never seen The Iron Giant.
Okay,
no.
I'm not surprised. It did kind of go under the radar. It's based on a book called, I think, The Iron Man, but it bears very little resemblance to the literature. It was released in sort of the late 90s, 99, I think, and it's the seminal work, the debut work of director Brad Bird, who you might recognise as the guy who's done things like some of the Mission Impossible stuff. He did some of the newer Jurassic Park stuff. He was on the creative team for a lot of kind of DreamWorks stuff for kids, but essentially, the Iron Giant it's set in the Cold War, which is why I think you might enjoy it, Britisher. And it's got Vin Diesel.
I would just be sitting in front of the television going, China.
No, Vin Diesel voices the titular giant, and then I think in terms of other star-studded cast, you've also got who was the actress from Friends? One of the actresses from Friends, who...
Well, there's Jennifer Aniston.
That's the
Courtney
one.
Cox,
Jennifer Aniston.
Don't even watch that show, and I know that.
I know, but I don't.
Well, it's one of those ubiquitous things. I don't think you necessarily had to watch the series to kind of be aware of it. It was kind of everywhere about 20 years ago, wasn't it?
Unironically, my wife and my roommate have been rewatching that show from the beginning, and they're driving me mad.
Oh, wasn't there a thing, perhaps about a year or two ago, whereby the woke got annoyed about Friends because it was so politically incorrect? Accordingly,
there was a couple of. I mean, they were Jacobin style places, but yes, that did happen.
I do recall there was a bit of a sort of a frisson of yes, whereby it's so terrible. How could a generation possibly have watched this? It's
Friends, so white. All of the tropes hit it, but it was like crazy lefty rags. But it did happen. You're not making it up.
Oh, for goodness.
Yeah, when you kind of think that even something as kind of innocuous as that was suddenly sinful, but yeah. Strange.
I just Friends made the left in a lot of places. It's the consumer class who consumed Friends and continually reference it to the exclusion of all else. Anyway, no, not that I have a massive disdain for Friends after seeing what it did to my sister. Anyway, but yeah. So the Iron Giant is the story about a child named Hogarth in the American sort of. In Maine, he is. I don't know where. I was going to say Midwest, but I don't actually know what's the Midwest of America.
Maine is very much not the Midwest.
No, I didn't think so. But now I've embarrassed myself anyway.
It's more the Northeast, isn't it?
It's the veriest northeast eastiest.
The northeast eastiest.
Isn't it where Stephen King is from?
Originally, I believe. I think he lives in Florida now, but originally, I believe you're correct.
Yeah, I think he set quite a few stories there, didn't he? Precisely because that's where he was from.
Yes, at least The Shining definitely did.
But So the film has an excellent story, excellent soundtrack. It hits many notes touching on like the idea of what if a gun had a soul, essentially, and also playing into all of the Cold War paranoia about whether or not the Russians or the Chinese had sent it and what to do, and it's very charming as well, with lots of references to media of the time, and Superman comics as well. For anyone who's watched it, the Superman reference will bring a tear to your eye already, and I would certainly recommend it. It's a short film, relatively. I mean, it's 87 minutes, so less than an hour and a half, and it's well worth your time. I know I've not done a great review there, but very much, I don't know if it's just the nostalgia of it being part of my childhood as well, but like it's just a really like a lovingly made film as well.
One off. They didn't do The Iron Giant Returns.
No. It's a self-contained story.
Son of Iron Giant.
Well, it was a Son of Iron Giant.
Iron Giant versus Predator.
It was. It was a complete flop on arrival. So I'm kind of grateful that there isn't an Iron Giant.
Is it one of those that was kind of, it flopped in the cinema because no one quite knew what to make of it, and then word of mouth began to spread, and it kind of did well. I mean, there were several films like that. I think the most famous one is The Shawshank Redemption, because everybody saw. I mean, these were the days when people had newspapers. And the newspapers would do a brief write-up of what was on in the cinema. Some people who are as old as I am will know what the hell I'm talking about. And, of course, you would look at The Shawshank Redemption as it would be in the cinema listing, and it would just go, gritty prison drama. And everybody would look at it and go, I don't really fancy a gritty prison drama.
He's not making
and therefore, in the cinema, it totally flopped. And then on video rental, it suddenly made its money back.
Yeah, I will say this. That was a little bit better when I was a kid than when you were a kid, because when you were a kid, I've seen some of it. Like when my grandfather passed, he had a bunch of really old papers, and I've seen stuff like that where the description is like literally less than a line, right? By the time I was a kid, the description would be like 2.5 lines, maybe. So it was still bad, but it wasn't as bad.
Well, wasn't there a thing with Star Wars where it was essentially the only line A New Hope got to describe it was something like a space opera or something like that, and it was almost entirely the troubled development of the film that got people in to see it, and the fact that he had screened this film to several top directors, including Steven Spielberg. And they had almost all of them, with the exception of Spielberg, who said it had promise, denounced it as one of the worst things they'd ever seen. And of course, people wanted to see what this absolute train wreck of a film had been. And then, of course, it was great. So they got their friends in to see it, and it became this mass phenomenon.
Yeah, no, it's.
I mean, then again, I think Star Wars was heavily promoted, wasn't it?
Was it? Let me see if I can find.
I don't know whether it will have been in its initial release, or once it started rolling out for the rest of the world. So it could well in America have been a sort of, let's see if this floats. But I think by the time that had happened for the rest of the world, they actually fairly heavily promoted it. I think here in Britain, it was fairly heavily promoted.
Oh, that would make more sense, yeah.
And so too on the continent.
So what happened was that they were concerned that it would be beaten out by Smokey and the Bandit. So they released...
Well, I could see why you would think that, yes, because that is a bloody good film.
So they released
according to what I'm seeing from CBS, apparently it had mixed reviews. Either the reviewer loved it or absolutely hated it.
Well, they said fewer than 40 theatres had ordered the film. The studio managed to pump up those numbers by, if they wanted to get another film called The Other Side of Midnight, which was at the time eagerly anticipated, they had to order Star Wars as well. So it debuted in 1977, May 25th, in fewer than 32 theatres, and 8 more on the Thursday and Friday, which it immediately broke box office records, becoming one of the first ever blockbuster films, and Fox capitalised on this, accelerating plans to broaden its release. So they didn't know, and then they were putting their stock into Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which they thought was going to be better, and then Spielberg disagreed. So there you go. Yeah.
Bizarre movie promotions that I still remember was the first Batman.
The one with the Burton one, do you mean?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Because, they literally started hanging up posters and, billboards all over the place, just with a bat signal.
Oh,
not even,
yes.
There wasn't even the title of the film or anything. And this was just the warm-up. This was just in order to gain public attention. And then over time, these posters would be changed. And then eventually it would be Batman is coming and stuff like that. So I dread to think how much money was spent globally on promoting that film. They got their success, but it does kind of show that there is a sort of black art to it in how to promote films. Funnily enough, wasn't Weinstein believed to be one of the sort of chief wizards in how to promote films? Not just in order to get them sort of a global viewing, but then later also in order to make sure they got prices. Yes, but obviously that's more than likely one of those words we're not supposed to say on the air these days. I don't know.
Yeah, I know.
It's first...
trying to talk about something and dodging around and going, okay, if I get my own channel needed, I don't care, but I really don't want to get his channel. So what words do I use?
Here's a funny thing. Like going back to your Batman example, you're right. The marketing worked. He had put up those posters. But they couldn't put the type font on it initially of Batman because it was in a RoboCop font. So what they did was they created a trailer that they rushed out to play in theatres, an assembling of scenes without music, which created enormous anticipation for the film. In the months before its release in 1989, a popular culture phenomenon known as Batmania began, and they sold over $750 million worth of merchandise in the preceding months. Like, everyone had a bat signal apparently. If you can imagine the kind of corporate behemoth that's pumping this stuff out, must have been an amazing time to be making money in it,
Then eventually you got to see the film and you went, so this was it?
Yeah.
This is what it was about?
I mean, Jack Nicholson was all right in it, I suppose.
Jack Nicholson was all right. I much preferred Michael Keaton in some of the other more sort of slightly eccentric films that he did. I mean, this one, if you want a movie recommendation, try the film Gung Ho with Michael Keaton. That's a really fun film. I really enjoyed that. But Batman, I kind of saw it and I just went, oh, okay. And that was it. It never really impacted with me. And the more sequels they made, the more bizarre I think it became. I mean, I remember, didn't they have Danny DeVito dolled up as some kind of penguin man or something?
Yeah, they had him as the Penguin.
Of course. I mean, I didn't find it particularly memorable as far as Batman films go, but because my dad, my parents kept it from me for a while because, of course, Nicholson's Joker is quite sadistic, but by the standards of film,
is he?
Yeah,
what am I not remembering?
If I remember correctly, Nicholson's Joker burns his girlfriend's face off with acid or something at some point in the film.
Mm-hmm.
I to be honest, no idea. This is how memorable it was.
Exactly. So, clearly it was very popular at the time, but I don't remember it being watching it in hindsight and. Watching it in the modern age as someone who wasn't around when that film released.
Yeah, I was going to say, that film, if I remember right, is actually older than you anyway. So.
Shh. They can't be told. Nobody is allowed to know how young I am. Ridiculous.
I'm being nice. I've called you baby enough on stream already, so you know.
Stop flirting with me.
You should be careful about saying that to a vet.
Can I leave you two alone?
No, I think that's... However, unfortunately, I am going to have to call the stream there. I know it's been a shorter one, folks. I'm really sorry about the delay to starting, but I hope that an hour and a half has sated you for now. Thank you ever so much to Ratface for sending a picture of a hot dog to us for $1.50 or something earlier. Thank you very much. But unfortunately, that's all I've got time for today. We will hopefully, assuming no other issues, be seeing you all next Monday for another episode. But until then, take care, everyone. Have a great week. Look after yourself. Stay safe. Take care. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.